Hey everybody, and welcome to another Flipping Pages. Today we're going to have a look at this rulebook right here. This is Void Fighter by Osprey Wargames. Void Fighter, a science fiction dogfighting wargame by Casey Garsk and illustrated by Dimitris Martinos. Yeah, so the at the back it says Void Fighter is a wargame of space fighter combat where players pilot their squadron, perform special maneuvers, including barrel rolls, immolment turns, and unleash a barrage of laser blasts, all in an effort to defeat their foes. So basically, it's a dog fighting rulebook, but set in space, which I think is really, really awesome. It's I don't see rules like this very often. Now, when I was much younger, there was a rule book rule set which I saw at the back of West End Games' Star Wars RPG, and this was called Star Warriors. I didn't manage to browse that rulebook until much later in life. It's basically a Star Wars game with tokens and stuff like that, which I thought was very interesting because it was basically dogfighting. And then I think around the same year, I think 1987, Renegade Legion's Interceptor came out. Again, this one I did not indulge or did not read in 1987 simply because I didn't have the funds for it. I only found out about the game I think in the early 90s, like that, when I was going through my collecting rulebook phase, or at least flipping through rulebooks at my friend's house and stuff like that. So yeah, in my earliest recollection of dogfighting rule sets is basically Star Warriors, and then Renegade Legion 1987. Now, very strangely though, right in the early parts of the 1990s, I was working in this game shop called Games Castle, and there was this one guy who kept coming into the store, and he was really into this game called Silent Death. Now, mind you, at the time, at the store, folks were into Warhammer Fantasy. Epic Warhammer was really, really big. So whenever he would come along, he'd try to introduce the game to a few folks, and sometimes I get to watch a game or two happening, but to be honest, I myself only had a game of Silent Death much later, a few years later, only because a friend had a rule set. So yeah, these are my earliest recollection of science fiction dogfighting rule sets. Of course, let's not forget that in recent years, FFG released the extremely popular X-Wing game, which I thought was revolutionary, was exciting, until the game met its unfortunate end. So having seen this rulebook, and the fact that it was going to come out was actually quite exciting to me. So what we're going to do today, we're going to actually look inside the rulebook the best we can. Hopefully, we'll see, whether this. I wouldn't know whether the game is good or not, but we're gonna just flip through the rulebook very, very quick. Now, let's look inside. Now, apparently, most of the figures in this book is from the author's private collection, which I thought was really, really fantastic. And the first thing I want to say about this rulebook is I didn't really like how the book was laid out. But layouts don't really tell you much about the rule set. So let's just get into this. So it starts off with Into the Void. I thought this was really, really nice. It's a little bit of fiction to get you into the feel of the game, a little bit of flavor. Introduces the Yellow Jackets, which we'll talk about later. And then we have the design philosophy, or the origins of the game, Void Fighter from Casey. I like the fact that he writes a little bit here because it helps to see where he's coming from, where he's going with the rule set. And then you got the fluff, which is about this much more or less. There's more fluff inside the book, but this is this more or less the setup. And you got the Sagittarian Frontier, the Inertialess Drive, which is basically the engine of the ships that is in this universe. And we've got the Confed, which is basically the main authority, and then the Void Tigers, which are basically the named squadron, or the named heroes, open quotes, close quote, heroes. Now, one of the reasons why I said I didn't like the layout is because right there you got chapter 1. I would have liked it if chapter 1 was in a separate page altogether. I'm not so sure whether it was because of page budgets, but you know, it would have laid out the book much better if, you know, this was a totally different page. But, you know, that's layout, and that should be, you know, for another day. But there are also quotes like this throughout the whole book, which I thought is really interesting because it, you know, it injects some flavor into the book. Now, the art also is really quite nice, and because they had an artist in there to do the art, you know, the art's quite consistently nice. Anyways, so in this game, we are working with 3 sizes of ships, and I think about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different dice. We have the D4, D6, D8, D12. And basically, there are 2 kinds of rolls. There are opposing rolls and you know, unopposed rolls and stuff like that. It's also miniature agnostic, which I think is fantastic, and scale agnostic. So, you know, you can play this with any of the you know, miniatures that you have, whether you've got your, you know, call to arms miniatures that you want to use, or you want to use your old X-wing, you know, you can use that as well. Or you know, there was this, I think if you look around, there are enough ships. In fact, you can use your silent death ships, you can use your or tokens, whichever. It's miniature agnostic and it's scale agnostic, which is great. Now the whole game works on these 5 different dice and sticks. So these are measuring sticks. So you don't exactly have to worry too much about getting a measuring tape out. Just 3 different sticks: short sticks, medium sticks, and long sticks. And in many ways, it feels a little bit like X-wing, a little bit, and also which I think is great. You know, it simplifies things. I mean, you want the game to like flow, because according to the design, you know, you'll be playing up to about 15 ships to side, or maybe more common 10 ships. So yeah, you want something that's quick. Anyways, each ship has 4 different stats: speed, defense, firepower, and piloting. So that should give you an idea of how simple the rule really is. And the ships that you will have in your squadron are snub fighters, gunships, and corvettes. And this is basically it's on the small side. Now, I didn't mention full thrust in the beginning of the video simply because full thrust is slightly bigger. And I think if you were to compare this with something that's more current, this is more X-wing, and full thrust would be a little bit more Armada, or in between Armada and X-wing. But yeah, let's not get into that. Anyway, so chapter 2 is playing the game, and you got these different sequences. You got your command phase, initiative phase, movement, gunnery, and maintenance phase. You know, now if you set them up into squadrons, they activate differently, and all of this, like, you know, I'm not gonna talk about the rules too much, because, you know, the price of the book is the rules that you're gonna get. So I can easily say that the rules are pretty simple, very fast. You know, it takes into account the fact that you're gonna have like 10 to 15 ships, and I like the fact that even, you know, when it comes to designing different weapons, you know, there's a little like sidebar here that says, you know, he went for generic guns because you know, it worked for his system, which I think is kind of cool. Anyways, so you got all these different maneuvers, right? And this different maneuver will have these little codes here: S, G, C, and GCR. It basically means that, you know, for like the move danger zone, you know, snub fighters, you know, corvettes and gunships can use this maneuver. Very nice, very simple. So it's basically, let me see now, 1, 2, very 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, maybe 7, 8 pages of rules, and then you have the terrain and, you know, scenario based models. Now this is basically all the things that will populate your table: your asteroids, your objects, your space creatures. That's kind of nice, space creatures. And then you have like your mines, your turrets, and ground vehicles, stuff. So it's basically all these will help populate your table, which I think is very nice to add to the game. And you got your what's this? Chapter 5 is the shipyard, and here is, you know, you want to do your there's a part of the game where you can do your docking and stuff like that. That's very nice. But I must also add that the miniatures used here are very cool. I wish they put you know, little like captions on, you know, where they got the miniature from, whether it's custom made, you know, or self-designed. That would help. I mean, you know, you want to know where he got the ships from. You're in case you're inspired. Anyways, so you've got ship upgrades, and this is where you get to design your own ship, which I think is kind of nice, because in this part, you're designing a squadron, is you design your own ship. So you can use any of the ships. Yeah, I mean, if you want to take some of the Minbari ships and you want to, you know, make them into something else, you can use this to help with that. And you got all these different upgrades. As an example here, nice piece of art. And then you got your squadron. Chapter 7 is no, so chapter 6 is recruiting your squadron. See what I mean by the chapter should be on separate pages. Anyways, chapter 7 is the Void Fighter catalog. And here are the ships that's in world. So you got these are the Void Tigers. Void Tigers are supposed to, I think they're like the main heroes, the black sheep, if you want, if in terms of the old TV show, you know, Baba Black Sheep. I can't remember. Is that what it's called? Anyways, yeah. So the main guys are the Void Tigers, and you know the Snot Fighters like the Hellhound and the Manticore, stuff like that, and they all have their own stats. So you can actually use this as a base, right? And then remember I was telling you earlier that there's fluff all over the book. Yeah. So little bits of fluff are scattered, and they're put in the intro of the different factions. Like here, ships of the Centauran Empire. And you got different ships here, ships of the Consolidated Federation, and you got pirates and scoundrels of the Sagittarian Frontier, and then all the different ships. So you can actually play your faction and actually choose any of the ships and just go with what's been said. Ships of the Children of Ra, we have fluff there. Ships of the Celestial Chorus, ships of the Snidarians. But yeah, very nice ships. Now, if you're looking for ships to use, I mean, you can always use the old Firestorm Armada figures. Just, you know, mentally scale them down to be fighters instead of like giant ships of the line and stuff like that. I guess it could work. Yeah, it's just a matter of refocusing, reimagining the ships, right? Yeah. I mean, the ships like this actually like the Aquan Prime ships. Anyways, moving along, we got different scenarios in chapter 8, and these are the scenarios that you can play with. There are, let me see now, 7, 8, 9. Do you have a 10? Yes, we have a 10, 11, 12, well, 12 scenarios for you to play with. And then, you know, you got chapter 9, which is basically the Void Fighter campaigns. And here's how to do your campaigns. And then, you know, pilots are extremely important when it comes to something like this. So you got your pilot, survival, and stuff like that. And then you got this nice piece of art, which is basically the cover, all done by Dimitri. And then you got pilot advancement, mission consequence, and then you got all the rosters and different charts, which I think is kind of nice. Now, I don't know. I don't know how well this game will do. I hope it does well, because you know if it does well, then you can probably look forward to having a second edition and perhaps some expansions. But the fact that it's just a dogfighting, sci-fi dogfighting game makes it pretty unique out there. I know a lot of folks who enjoy dogfighting, which is why a lot of folks like the World War One era of aerial combat, because there's a lot of dogfighting there. I mean, when it comes to World War Two, it's a bit faster, but World War One is where all this like immelman and all the different maneuvers are happening. And I have a feeling that some of this has helped inspire this rule set. So yeah, looks good. The only bad thing I can say about this rule set is, like I said, the layout. I wish each chapter was in its own page, but you know, it's a minor thing. I've yet to play this. I've yet to try this out. This rulebook just came out, so yeah, go and have a look. I mean, if dogfighting with sci-fi planes is your thing, you know, check this out from Osprey Games. Yeah, so that's pretty much it. If you like flip throughs like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. And as always, don't forget to enjoy painting those figures.